Fidel, it's great
Welcome.
to be here with you.
Thank you so much. It's when I first came in here, I reminded you that I was reminded 30 years ago. I used to bring my mother-in-law here to sell her two Grey Hills rugs, and also my brother-in-law Richard Ironclad his war clubs to Tohattan Gallery, and we stayed. I also stayed in this hotel almost 20 years ago, 22 years ago, when we shot 500 Nations, the Kevin Costner CBS 8-hour 4-part series. We stayed a week in this hotel, and it's so beautiful. You told me that when we met, you told me that you grew up here as a boy in the hotel.
Yeah, this is family operation for 94 years now, and so I grew up here in some fashion, running around the halls, and then I became employed when I was in my teens, and I've been working here for a lot of years over my lifetime. So it's got a lot of stories for me as well.
Mm-hmm. What stands out for you as a boy? What do you remember about this hotel? Was there a particular room that you loved? We just took a walk through your lobby, but is there a particular story that stands out, a memory that stands out in your mind?
A couple of them. One, it was a little more fun as a kid because I'd slide down the stairs in a box.
Okay.
You could get some real speed going up those stairs. But there was a fellow named Denny Viles who was the president of the American Vanadium Corporation here in town. And if you think about Mr. Magoo, and you can kind of get a picture of Denny Viles, except that he was about 6'5", and bald with big glasses, and one of the nicest fellows. And he lived here for about 2 years.
Wow.
And we'd take him on walks and take him down to breakfast, and so the part that is important to me, I think, is the interaction with the numbers of people that have come through here and how they brought their energy and their friendship here to us, and really made something special for us as employees and owners of the hotel to get to know them.
Now, if I understand some of the history you were sharing with me, you were telling me that actually the hotel was built in 1887, and who built it, and where were they from? And then your family bought it. Your mother's father bought this, who was a Pony Express rider, who also, there's an interesting story attached to that I want you to tell. But so who was the first family that bought and founded the hotel?
Well, it was built by the Strater family, and they're from Cleveland, Ohio. They came out here to help develop this little town and work with the railroad. So they bought this prime piece of property. They initially built a paint and oil company called the Strater Paint and Oil Company.
Okay.
Very unusual. And they saw the opportunities within Durango. Henry Strater's father, Anton, he worked with Rockefeller, and so had quite a bit of money, but they didn't think this gas thing was going anywhere, so they thought they'd come out and make their fortune in the mining areas.
Okay.
So it's got that initial start, and then the Stillwell family owned it for a while, and then my family started in 1926. Actually, it's my dad's father, Earl Sr., and he bought the hotel along with a number of Durango businessmen, and then slowly and surely he bought them out, and our family has been here for all these years.
Interesting. Now, the story of your on the Jarvis side, your mother's father, grandfather.
Yep.
Tell me the story, because I find it very appropriate for why I chose the hotel to do this program, and I'll explain that a little bit. But could you share that story about him being a Pony Express rider?
Yeah, he was about 12 years old,
Yeah.
and his father had run away and left him to be the breadwinner of the family. So
Okay.
back then, at 12 years old, you were ready to take on life. And so he enlisted himself in the Pony Express between Durango and Farmington. And as he would go down there as a young boy, he noticed that there were always Utes that would come down and try to catch up with him, and it scared him because he was young, and so he would go as fast as he could to get away, and they would come from different directions all the time, and he was pretty terrified of that. And on one particular trip, his appendix ruptured,
Mhm.
and he fell from the horse and would have likely died at that spot.
Mhm.
Except these same Utes that had chased him all these different times came to his aid, took him up and back to their camp, and nursed him back to life. And so he learned to speak both Ute and Navajo. And he later got involved in the movie industry in 1911, 1912, and created a movie for the love of a Navajo, where all of the bad guys were the white guys, and the good guys were the Navajos.
Right.
And,
So he's
and
finally telling the truth.
telling the truth and trying to put
Right.
a little balance in things.
Right.
And
Right.
he was
Interesting.
quite a guy.
So, when you told me that, I was moved by that. And I was thinking there's many stories amongst Native people where they've come across another warrior, another hunter, and needing help, and they actually take them in, they adopt them, give them a name so they're recognized amongst their own people, then send them back with gifts and horses. So that's how they created these alliances, So do you think that might have developed or helped foster friendships and communication when a humanitarian gesture like that was brought forth by the Ute people?
Without a doubt. Yeah, he certainly felt a strong compassion for the Native Americans that lived here, and it was not something that was brought to him through his family. It was something he learned individually.
Right. So it's interesting that you could have done anything you wanted to, but you chose to stay in the hotel business. You were telling me of different places you worked, throughout your life, and you came back to hold on to, manage, and preserve this historic hotel. Why?
This hotel has spoken to me ever since I was a kid, and I think the history, the feeling of reality that you get here, there's an energy that I don't know that I ever knew to look for an energy, but I've always felt it. And so, when you grow up here, you meet people. There was a Jemez Pueblo person that would come here named Santiago, and he would sell rugs and jewelry in our lobby. And I would sit down next to him, and he would tell me how he was going to sell things. And he was probably as good a salesman as you'd find in the world. I mean, he was just really on it and fun to talk with. And so the connection that you get with people, whether they're Kathy and Louis L'Amour, or Gerald Ford, or Santiago, or any of these people, this is what this hotel is about, is the connection and the centering of people.
Now I understand that there was a major treaty signed here, or some sort of a federal action that was witnessed and signed. Was that the coming of the two railroads? What happened here?
No, it was actually the Transatlantic Treaty.
That's right. Thank you.
It was signed about 1972 or 3. It was TAT 6. And they tried to meet in New York to get this signed, and it was too political, and so they came here to Durango and were able to sign this international treaty, and it was in a November period of time.
No, that's when the cables were taken underneath
through
the
across
ocean.
the Atlantic. Yep.
Amazing. And
Yep.
they chose a place out here in the desert
Yeah.
to sign that.
Yeah, they had a rodeo.
I find that interesting. A rodeo.
Yeah, in November. It was a cold, brutal event for the Navajo rodeo.
Right.
And but it really made the setting right for people to
Right.
let down and
Right.
work something out.
So that's interesting, very interesting. So as knowing your history, and I think many people know this, that the development and expansion of the railroad and the finding of gold and silver in the Black Hills in the 1860s, 1840s in California, 1860s in the Black Hills, and then out here was in direct proportion to the genocide of Native people, indigenous people of this land, and also the culture. So for me, it became an interesting place to have a discussion about health, wellness, and healing because of the duality of it all. You know, I mean, this is such an amazing. I fell in love with this town 30 years ago, and I've had a long-standing, long-distance love affair with Durango. And you know, my son came and worked here. I've had several nephews and nieces at Fort Lewis College, and I think one of the things that stands out for me is that in this country right now, in many nations, but I know here in this country, in this nation, a lot of change is happening because of the elections, the pandemic, and you know, you and I earlier before we were talking today, we were talking about the impact of the pandemic. You know, we have almost 9-10 months of isolation now. People are hitting the wall emotionally. I have several friends of mine that are going through a very, very difficult time emotionally. They've never been married, they've been single all their lives, professional, retired, and they're in this isolation. And how has it been here at the hotel? I mean, I'm sure you've been impacted, but I know you've created some other programs, you know, to invite people still to be, you know, in this historic environment, beautiful environment. But how do you see things? How are you feeling the pandemic? You know, in a little bit we're going to go down and talk with a panel of various healers, doctors, therapists about coping strategies. But how do you see this? How are you being impacted by this pandemic?
Any difficult time in history, whether it's this pandemic or depressions or recessions, have the ability to create an opening that you don't normally have. And the Strater has been challenged economically. We've been shut down in many ways, but we've always figured out a way to make those things that are valuable shine. And so we've created an environment called Suite Dining, S-U-I-T-E, and instead of having a restaurant such as the one we're sitting in, we have opened up some of our guest rooms so that we can do takeout into those rooms. We never would have been able to do something like that. So with every challenge comes an opportunity, and I'm sure that this pandemic, as terrible as it has been, is going to create something new for all of us to maybe step back and listen more than talk. And I think that there's a lot of things we all need to learn and listen to instead of taking the path we've always taken before.
Right. You know, my 28 years as an ethnographic documentary filmmaker, working with a lot of tribal elders, a lot of Native American spiritual leaders, they talked about times like these. They, you know, a name was mentioned earlier, Thomas Banyaki, a Hopi elder that went several times to the UN, and I interviewed him several times. Talked about challenges that sometimes between 3 and 7 generations something happens that really affects everyone. And that's one of those, this is one of those times, I think. And the Native elders say, use it as a time of purification. See it as a time of purification, that there'll be a cleansing. There'll be a whatever needs to come to the surface will come to the surface. You know, when you cook something down, you know, you told me you worked in a kitchen for a while, you know, in your professional career, and it's like we're cooking. You know, tensions rise, emotions rise, you know, feelings, you know, come, and it's a time to really, for self-reflection, deep contemplation, resetting, redesigning, and restarting. And I know, you know, there's several business owners that I know here in Durango now that I've met, you know, that are seriously impacted by this too. You know, there's families, there's employees. And so I know that there's stress. I know that people are being stressed out. I know that people are going into different levels and degrees of depression. So I guess one of the reasons why this came as a natural choice was because there's still beauty. You know, there's still the air, that we breathe, the light that we have. You know, there's the natural essence and beauty of life around us. You know, but there's also this consciousness about how do we move forward with elegance and compassion and humanity, or with selfishness and self-serving inhumanity. So I want to say thank you, you know, for allowing us to tape this show here, this program, and we're gonna at this time we're going to play 2 previews from 2 of my documentaries, one on the 1890 Wounded Knee Massacre, and how after 100 years they brought back a ceremony called Washigila, wiping the tears. And it was prophesied in the 7th generation that the young people would bring these ceremonies back. And it's a very powerful story. It's on YouTube, but we're only going to do the preview. We've decided to do the preview, and we're going to do the preview of Healing the Spirit, a documentary that I'm currently working on about Native American male and female suicide survivors. Because I think that that's one of the things that I've learned in my time, in my life, with Native elders too, and working with indigenous prophecies, is that the spiritually strong will survive anything and everything. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, and we'll see you in a couple minutes around a table with our panelists and our guests in our panel discussion on collective trauma and grief-informed healing. Thank you. Fidel Moreno with Mr. Rod Barker at the Strater Hotel.
Thank you, Fidel.